It was supposed to be a celebration, not a war zone. I had just placed the last pepperoni pizza box on the table, the smell of melted cheese and garlic mingling with the faint scent of lemon cleaner. Celia was laughing in the kitchen, her arm draped casually around her sister Nora's shoulder, the two of them sharing some wine. Mateo darted through the living room in his Spider-Man socks, clutching his Lego trophy like it was made of diamonds. Layla was setting up her robotics display next to the TV, proudly talking through her project with her cousins like a tiny professor. She placed second in the regional robotics competition out of 30 schools. I could barely contain how proud I was. This was her day. Their day. Our day. The house buzzed with conversation, camera shutters, clinking glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. Then everything stopped. All that warmth curdled. Nora had been by the punch bowl 1 second. The next, she was striding toward me with tight shoulders and a look on her face I'd seen only once at Celia's bridal shower when someone brought up her ex. Her voice sliced through the chatter like a blade. You're not even a real father. You just adopted them. The room froze. The clinking stopped. The buzz went flat. Before I could blink, her hand came across my face. A sharp, open-palmed slap. It landed with a sickening crack, not just against skin, but against everything we'd built. My head tilted slightly from the impact, and for a brief moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the real damage came from the silence that followed. Layla stood frozen halfway through explaining the grip mechanics of her robot hand, her lips slightly parted, her brown eyes wide with something worse than fear, disbelief. Mateo dropped his trophy. It hit the wood floor with a hollow plastic clunk. Celia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her wine glass trembled in her fingers. Clara, Celia's mother, stood with her hands halfway to clapping and then slowly lowered them. Lionel, her father, stared as if his own daughter had slapped him instead. The air was thick with the weight of something irreversible. I touched my cheek, not out of pain, but acknowledgement. It burned, yes, but not as much as the look on Layla's face, like the world had cracked beneath her feet. I turned slowly to face Nora. I didn't yell. I didn't step forward. I smiled. A calm, chilling smile. Since you brought it up, my voice was steady, measured. But inside, something ancient cracked open. She blinked, caught off guard by my lack of retaliation. She expected a scene. She wanted a reaction that would validate her outburst. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. My smile grew smaller but deeper, like a man who had just opened a door to a room full of answers. People shifted uncomfortably. Celia finally set her glass down and stepped forward, whispering my name like she wasn't sure whether to pull me back or stand beside me. But I didn't look at her. Not yet. I kept my eyes locked on Nora, and I could see it, the flicker of doubt creeping in. She had come in guns blazing, but now she was realizing she may have fired the first shot in a war she couldn't win. I glanced at the kids. Mateo had picked up his trophy, but was holding it now like it was something fragile, something that could break again. Layla met my gaze. That was the moment I anchored myself. I wouldn't let her memory of this night end with shame. I wouldn't let her carry that image of her father, yes, her father, taking a slap in front of family and shrinking beneath it. No, this wasn't going to end with silence and awkward glances. If Nora wanted the truth, I'd give it to her, and everyone else in this room. I turned toward the TV and picked up the remote. Why don't we all sit down? I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people exchanged glances. It seems there's a conversation we've been avoiding for far too long. My voice was still calm, but there was a gravity to it that made people obey. I didn't need to shout. Truth doesn't need a megaphone. Nora's posture stiffened. You're not going to make this into some pity, she started. But I cut her off with a look. Just one sharp look. I had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the helper, the guy who picked up plates and ran errands. The adopted dad. The convenient target. But not today. Layla stepped beside me, hesitating just a moment before slipping her small hand into mine. My throat tightened. Mateo stood on my other side, and when I looked down, he gave me a slight nod. That was all the permission I needed. Celia finally found her voice. Nora, what the hell is wrong with you? She asked, eyes wet and trembling. But her sister didn't answer. She was already retreating into that false confidence, that cruel arrogance she wore like armor. I didn't care. I'd spent too long letting her slither by on passive aggression and fake concern. If she wanted to expose me, she should have remembered. Light exposes everyone, especially snakes. My eyes moved across the room, meeting each face. This is the last time anyone questions who I am to these kids, I said quietly, but with steel in my tone. You want to talk about blood? Let's talk about sacrifice. Let's talk about choice. Let's talk about who shows up. Because parenthood isn't in the DNA. It's in the details. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was stunned. It was shifting. I saw the moment Clara lowered her head, and Lionel blinked a little slower like they'd been jolted from a sleep they didn't realize they'd been in. And me? I stood taller than I had in years, with the handprint still warm on my cheek, and my children beside me like proof that love, real love, doesn't need matching chromosomes. Just presence. Just choice. Just courage. And I had all three. I remember the hospital waiting room more vividly than I remember our wedding day. The sterile light overhead, the humming vending machine in the corner, the quiet conversations behind pulled curtains. Celia sat next to me, knees pulled up on the chair, fingers curled around the hem of her sweatshirt like she was trying to disappear inside it. Her eyes were dry. Mine weren't. That had been our third loss. The third time we'd picked out names we never got to use. The third time she whispered to me, maybe I'm not meant to be a mom. And the third time I told her, we are meant to be parents. Just maybe not this way. We stopped chasing biology after that. No more appointments. No more injections that made her sick. No more calendars marked with hopeful stars. The grief never really left the house. It just moved into a quieter room. But we started talking about other ways to fill the silence. I don't even remember who brought up adoption first. Maybe it was me. I just know one afternoon Celia came home with a folder, yellow, thick, with two paper-clipped photos of two children with dark hair and serious eyes, taken in front of a pale wall. Layla and Mateo. Siblings. From El Paso. The description said bonded pair, as if love could be filed into a checkbox. She placed the folder in my lap and said, these two. I don't know. Something about them. And the moment I looked at their faces, something shifted. I didn't feel lightning. I didn't hear angels. I just felt anchored. Like I was staring at a photo of someone I hadn't met yet but already missed. The process was long, draining, and filled with questions that made you feel like a suspect rather than a future parent. Background checks. Home visits. Financial disclosures. We didn't complain. We said yes to everything. Interviews. Workshops. Therapy sessions. All of it. The first time we visited them, Layla didn't speak a word. Mateo hid behind her, clutching the hem of her shirt like a shadow. I remember sitting on the too small playroom couch, watching Celia read to them from a book about a dog who lost his tail and went looking for it. And I realized I was holding my breath, watching her speak gently to them, smile through their silence, not even when they didn't answer. I saw a part of her I hadn't seen since before the hospital visits broke her down. When she closed the book, Layla reached out and touched her wrist. That was it. That one moment. And that night, Celia cried for hours. Not because she was sad, but because she could finally picture a future again. One that didn't depend on biology or bloodlines. One that looked like healing. We brought them home in March. Mateo was 4. Layla had just turned 6. The first few nights were impossible. They didn't sleep. They didn't eat much. They didn't speak unless spoken to. But we learned quickly. Layla liked her toast with the edges cut off. Mateo hated tags and shirts. They both loved dinosaurs, especially the ones with long names. We kept routines strict, voices soft, patience long. Celia left nightlights in every room. I read to them every night even when they wouldn't sit close. And then one day, 6 months in, Layla called me Dad. We were in the Target parking lot. It was raining. She dropped her little stuffed bear in a puddle and started crying. I picked it up, wiped it off on my jacket, and she looked up at me with tears still clinging to her lashes and said, "Thanks, Dad." Just like that. No announcement. No ceremony. Just the word that rewired every nerve in my body. I didn't even make it into the store. I sat in the front seat and cried until my hand shook. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as someone who stepped in. I hadn't stepped into anything. I had built something. I had earned something. These kids were not extensions of someone else's legacy. They were mine. Not because I claimed them, but because they claimed me. Because love, real love, is not genetic. It's practiced. And I practiced it every single day. But not everyone saw it that way. From the beginning, Nora had a way of letting her tongue wrap itself in poison and still act surprised when it stung. She made jokes that weren't really jokes. Guess adoption's the trendy thing now. But your genes would have made honor roll kids. One time she asked Layla if she liked being adopted like it was a novelty, a science experiment, a polite horror. She said things like, "It's different when they're not yours," then laughed like it was harmless. Celia always brushed it off. "That's just Nora," she'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But I knew better. I saw the way Layla tensed when Nora walked in. I saw how Mateo wouldn't let go of my hand at family events. I never wanted to be the guy who pulled his kids out of a family, but I began to feel like I had to protect them from one. I told Celia more than once that Nora's words weren't just clumsy, they were cruel. "I'll talk to her," she always promised. But she never did. And I think, deep down, Celia didn't want to rupture whatever fragile peace existed between them. I understood. But understanding isn't agreement. I started watching more closely, listening harder, filing things away. I told myself it was temporary, that Nora would grow past it, that love would win out. But what I hadn't expected was that love would have to fight, that it would have to defend itself with more than smiles and goodwill, that eventually someone would corner me with all my love and ask, "Are you even real?" Well, I am. I may not have passed down my eyes or my hairline, but I passed down my steadiness, my common storms, my refusal to let fear win. Mateo inherited my curiosity. Layla inherited my fire. I didn't give them life, but I gave them everything that makes life safe and strong and full. I chose them every day. That's what makes a father. Not DNA, not paperwork, not surnames. Choice, sacrifice, showing up when no one claps, and standing between your children and any darkness that tries to convince them they're less than whole. Even when that darkness wears a smile and calls itself family. It started small. Always does. A few offhand comments here, an uncomfortable silence there. Nora had always been prickly, but after we brought Mateo and Layla home, something colder rooted itself in her tone, something condescending in every sentence she dressed up as concern. I told myself it was just adjustment, that not everyone moved at the same pace, that some people, even family, needed time to understand what we already knew, that love didn't need matching blood to be real. But months passed, and her remarks didn't slow. They sharpened. And when Celia started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, Nora's visits grew more frequent. Always unannounced. Always when I was home alone with the kids. The first time, she rang the bell and held up a bag of cookies like she'd come bearing peace. "Just thought I'd drop by and keep you company," she'd said, sweeping in like she owned the place. The cookies were burnt. She didn't sit down. She paced, looked at our walls, commented on how Layla's school art looked messy framed like that. Then she found Mateo in the living room, building a spaceship out of couch cushions and cardboard. She crouched beside him and said, "You know your real mommy would have loved to see this." I remember Mateo's eyes lifting toward me. I was standing by the kitchen door. He didn't cry. He just looked confused, like someone had told him the moon wasn't real. That night, I didn't tell Celia. I should have. But there's something about being the adoptive parent in a blood family that makes you second-guess your instincts. I didn't want to seem like I was stirring trouble. I didn't want Celia to think I couldn't handle it. I didn't want Nora to win. But I also didn't want to be caught flat-footed if things escalated. So I started recording. At first, it was just audio on my phone, a casually placed device on the kitchen counter. Nothing special. The next time Nora came over, I caught her asking Layla if she missed her real name. Layla, who'd chosen her new name herself with pride, looked up, wide-eyed. "You know, maybe one day you'll go back to where you came from," Nora added like it was a fairy tale ending. When I played that back alone later that night, something inside me locked into place. I bought 2 discrete security cameras the next day, installed one in the living room, another near the front hallway. Hidden, quiet. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't tell Celia. I told myself it was precautionary, a safeguard, insurance. But deep down, I was documenting something I didn't want to believe was real. That someone could look at these children, my children, and see anything other than belonging. The footage piled up. Nothing dramatic. No screaming. No physical harm. But the kind of quiet abuse that seeps into a child's understanding of themselves. I bet your real daddy had dark hair like yours. One day you'll understand why family's complicated. Don't take it personally, honey. It's just that your mom and dad didn't have you the normal way. Over and over again, packaged in the saccharine smile of an aunt who claimed she was just trying to keep them grounded. I started organizing the clips into folders. Labeled them by date. Added notes. I watched them back at night sometimes, heart hammering in my chest, rage boiling in my throat. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because every time I saw Nora's smug little smirk in those videos, I also saw Layla pretending not to care. Mateo blinking a little faster. I saw the weight they carried in silence. And I knew, if I struck back too soon, it would be for me, not them. I needed to be strategic. Not for revenge. For protection. Still, I started noticing signs the damage was settling in. Mateo started having night terrors again. Layla grew quieter, more withdrawn. Once, I asked her how school was, and she said fine. I didn't tell anyone I was adopted, so it was normal. That sentence hit me like a freight train. You don't have to hide who you are, I said, kneeling beside her. She gave me a brittle smile and said, I just want people to see me before they ask questions. And I knew what she meant. She wanted to be seen whole before someone tried to pull her apart. So I added that moment to the file too. Not because it was evidence, but because it reminded me what I was protecting. The worst part was Celia's silence. I tried to bring it up, gently. I'd ask if she noticed how Nora treated the kids. Celia would sigh and say, she's trying. Or, she doesn't mean it like that. Once, she even said, you know how she is. And I almost snapped, that's exactly the problem. But I didn't. Because when someone's been conditioned to believe family must be preserved at all costs, they'll bleed themselves dry before they cut the rope. So I carried it. Quietly. I took screenshots of texts Nora sent to Celia, telling her not to coddle the kids. Took recordings of her whispering things while pretending to be helpful. And I stored it all like kindling, not planning to use it, but knowing that if the moment ever came when I had to, I'd have a match ready. That moment, of course, came with a slap. And in that moment, as I stood with Layla's frightened eyes locked on mine and Mateo's dropped trophy echoing through the living room, I knew why I had saved every second, every insult, every manipulation. Because people like Nora don't throw bombs, they plant seeds. They whisper poison into ears and wait. And by the time the damage is visible, they've already started playing the victim. But I wouldn't let her rewrite this story. Not this time. The quiet collection I'd built wasn't just for defense. It was for truth. It was for showing everyone, Celia, Clara, Lionel, even the kids, that love isn't just soft. It protects. It shields. It fights when it must. And I would use every whisper Nora ever uttered as a weapon to defend the people I called mine. No apologies. No hesitation. Not anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. Layla's project was a study in inherited motion, robotic hands mimicking the grip reflex passed down through generations. Wires looped through cardboard tendons, motors gently whirring as they clenched and released, elegant in their simplicity. She'd explained it with the kind of quiet confidence she only wore when she was proud of something. Not loud, not boastful, just firm, rooted. Her classmates had been amazed. Her teacher called it college-level thinking. So when she stood in our living room that night, surrounded by half-eaten pizza slices and grinning relatives, describing her build with gestures that mirrored the machine, I saw something glowing in her. Something I'd spent years helping her find. Until Nora opened her mouth and snapped it in half. It's funny you're into genetics, she said, sipping red punch like it gave her permission. You don't actually share any with this family. The words didn't rise. They cut. Clean and cruel. The kind of line sharpened over time, honed like a knife meant for exactly this moment. The laughter stopped. Layla's hand dropped from her robot. Her eyes flickered to me, not panicked, not confused, just tired. Like she'd heard it before. I stepped forward, instinct flaring. I caught Celia's eye across the room, silently begging her to intercept, to finally draw a line. But her expression was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shame and disbelief. I turned back to Layla, ready to guide her away, shield her, crack some half-joke to defuse the room. But Layla beat me to it. Her chin lifted, just barely. He's still my dad, she said, voice even. Stronger than it had any right to be. That's when Nora snapped. Oh, come on, she spat, louder now, the punch sloshing as she set her glass down hard. Let's stop pretending. He didn't make you. He didn't make Mateo. He just showed up and decided to play house. She turned on me then, eyes flashing. You're not even a real father. And before I could speak, before anyone could, her hand sliced through the air and landed across my cheek. It wasn't the first time I'd been slapped in my life, but it was the first time it felt less like violence and more like punctuation. A public declaration. A stake in the ground. The sting radiated across my jaw, a hot bloom beneath the skin. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I looked her square in the eye, steady as a stone, and I smiled. Since you brought it up, I said calmly, while the room unraveled. Celia gasped behind me, one hand over her mouth. Clara stepped forward, but stopped short, her breath catching. Lionel blinked like someone had flicked off the lights. Mateo looked like he might cry, his little fingers clutching the edge of the table. Layla didn't move, not even an inch. She just stood beside her robotic hand, this marvel of design and determination, and watched the grown-ups fall apart. Nora scoffed. "What? You're going to lecture me now," she said, turning to the crowd, like she was collecting votes. "All I did was speak the truth." "Did you?" I asked. She blinked. "You think genes make a father?" I took a step forward, not aggressive, just closer. "You think blood is what gets up at 2 a.m. when someone's sick? Or reads the same bedtime story 12 nights in a row? Or holds a child's hand through their first nightmare in a new house?" Nora rolled her eyes, but her mouth had tightened. "I didn't inherit these kids," I said, voice low and clear. "I earned them. Every scraped knee, every science fair, every slammed door followed by a soft apology, I showed up for all of it. Not because I had to, because I chose to." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just a flicker of something unsteady. "You want to talk about real?" I went on. "Layla built that robotic hand because she wanted to understand motion. But you came in here tonight to tear something apart. And now everyone sees it." I looked around the room. Eyes met mine. Not all approving, but watching, listening, waiting. Even Celia. Especially Celia. "And while we're on the topic of what's real," I said, "let's be clear. The only reason you get to breathe the same air as these kids is because I've kept quiet. I've let it slide. The comments, the visits, the little barbs hidden behind your fake smiles." Nora's nostrils flared. "I was trying to help them see the truth." "No," I said, sharp this time. "You were trying to chip away at their foundation, at their security. You don't get to do that, and then cry family." The room was still, so still I could hear the hum of Layla's robot fingers curling. "You wanted this moment, Nora. You provoked it. You slapped me in front of my children, in front of their family. But what you didn't realize is I've been preparing for this since the first time you called them strays in a text message." Her face paled. "I know," I said flatly. Celia's head turned toward her sister like she'd been struck. "What?" she whispered. I didn't break eye contact with Nora. "You think I didn't see the messages? The way you'd come by and whisper things to Layla while pretending to help? You've been poisoning the well for years." "Lies," she hissed. I laughed once. Just once. Cold and quiet. "Not lies. Recordings. Screenshots. Videos. You see, Nora, I may not have their DNA, but I know how to protect what's mine." That was the moment. Right there. When Nora realized she wasn't in control anymore. That her drama had hit a wall she couldn't climb. Her eyes darted to Clara, to Lionel, to Celia. But no one rushed to her side. "Get out," I said quietly. No one repeated it. No one argued. She hesitated, then turned, heels clacking against the tile like a retreat. She grabbed her coat too fast, dropped her phone, didn't pick it up. By the time the front door closed behind her, Mateo had walked over to Layla and silently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She just reached out and squeezed his hand. Celia was still standing by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over her chest, lips pressed in a line. She looked at me, not with anger, not with betrayal, but with something that looked a lot like realization. "Since you brought it up," I said again, softer this time. And finally, the silence shattered not with another slap, but with a kind of unspoken truth finally rising to the surface. I didn't move at first. After Nora slammed the door, I just stood there. My cheek still throbbed, but the sting had faded into something quieter, heavier. The kind of pain that sits beneath your skin, not because it hurts, but because it confirms something you hoped wasn't true. Around me, the silence hung like a painting no one wanted to look at. Clara had sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap like she didn't trust them to stay still. Lionel hovered near the fireplace, running a hand over his mouth again and again like he was trying to wipe away everything he'd just seen. Layla stood by her robotic project, arms crossed over her chest, lips pursed like she was holding in tears or rage, maybe both. Mateo sat cross-legged on the rug, gripping his Lego trophy so tightly I could see the whites of his knuckles. And Celia. Celia leaned against the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze darting from me to the kids to the floor. I took a breath, then another. Then I walked over to the television. "Everyone, have a seat," I said, voice steady, quiet, but with the kind of edge that doesn't invite debate. "I think it's time you see something." There was hesitation at first, of course there was. This wasn't how birthday celebrations were supposed to go. There was still pizza on the table. Streamers hung slightly lopsided above the mantel. Layla's homemade robot fingers twitched silently beside her, like they were waiting for a cue. But something in my tone made them listen. One by one, they sat. Clara. Lionel. Celia moved last, crossing the room slowly like her legs didn't want to cooperate. I pulled out my phone. The room darkened slightly as I mirrored the screen to the TV. The living room became a theater of reckoning. My thumb hovered over the first file. I looked at Layla. She gave me a small nod, eyes hard. I tapped play. The first video was from 3 months ago. The living room camera. Nora entering the house with the spare key Celia had given her back when she was helping with groceries. We weren't home. The kids were in their rooms. She walked straight to Layla's school folder, flipped through her drawings, scoffed, and tossed one aside. Sloppy, she muttered. You're supposed to be smart. Clara gasped. The next clip showed her picking up Mateo's science project and muttering, not bad, for a child of strangers. Celia made a sound in her throat like she might be sick. I moved on. Another video. Nora sitting on the couch, Layla curled up beside her, clearly uncomfortable. You know, she said sweetly, brushing Layla's hair back. One day you might get to meet your real mom. Wouldn't that be special? Layla's face on the screen, just barely flinching, eyes darting toward the hallway. I paused, turned to face the room. Celia had her hand over her mouth now. Clara's eyes were glassy. Lionel stared straight ahead, unmoving. She did this almost every week while you were working late, Celia, I said, my voice tight. She told Layla that one day she'd be taken away. Told Mateo he wasn't really part of this family. Said they'd never belong here. Celia's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Because you never wanted to hear it, I said. Not cruelly. Just plainly. Every time I tried, you said she didn't mean it. That she'd come around. I believed you for a while. But I couldn't let her keep eroding our kids just to maintain your peace. Celia didn't respond. She just stared at the paused image on the TV. Layla's face frozen mid-expression. I hit play again. Now the audio recordings. One by one. Nora on the phone with someone. I suspected another relative. It's disgusting, really. Celia could have had her own kids if she weren't so broken. Now she's pretending strangers are her children. The boys slow. The girls got attitude. Like their real parents weren't even worth the dirt they were buried in. Clara gasped like the words had punched her in the chest. Lionel finally spoke, voice low. My God. I paused again, turned back to face them. You still think this was just about a slap? I asked. No one answered. Celia whispered, she said. She was trying to support us. She was trying to rewrite reality, I said. Gaslight our children into believing they were broken puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Then I turned to Clara. You once told Layla she had your smile. She lit up for a week after that. But Nora made her feel like it was a lie. Like she had no right to belong. Clara's eyes flooded. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said softly. That's what hurts the most. That our kids were drowning under your noses, and no one stopped to ask why they were holding their breath. I sat down then. Finally. Let the silence do the rest of the talking. Nora wasn't in the room, but her presence still lingered like a bad smell. Her damage, her words, her cruelty, it was all there, spread across the screen like evidence in a courtroom no one had planned for. Celia looked down at her hands. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I said. We do. Together. But it starts with truth. And boundaries. And protecting our kids like they're ours in every way that matters. Clara reached for Lionel's hand. He squeezed hers. Then he stood. She's not welcome here, he said quietly. Not until she learns what love is. Not until she begs those children for forgiveness. And even then, maybe not. Clara nodded. She may be our daughter, she said. But those kids? They're our grandchildren. Fully. And we let them down. The room exhaled. Celia wiped her face. She turned to me. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I nodded once. Now you are. And that mattered. The tribunal wasn't loud. It didn't end in shouting or slammed doors. It ended in something harder, truth spoken in daylight. Everyone saw. Everyone knew. And the story Nora had been trying to write in shadows had just been burned by the light. I thought the room would erupt. I expected yelling. Maybe a wine glass flung against the wall. Maybe Celia storming into the bathroom and locking the door like she used to after every appointment that ended in grief. I expected Clara to defend Nora out of maternal obligation, Lionel to take the diplomatic route and try smoothing it all over like he was patching drywall. But none of that happened. What happened was worse. What happened was silence, dense and cutting, like the oxygen had been drained from the house. And then I pressed play again. The next clip was audio. I'd recorded it by accident, left my phone on the kitchen table when I stepped into the garage. Nora's voice came through the speakers like a bad memory. She was talking to Mateo, who was asking about his birth parents, the way kids do, softly, cautiously, like they're trying not to break something by asking. Nora responded with a laugh, not a kind one, but a hollow, bitter chuckle. "Oh, honey, your real parents aren't around anymore. They're probably rotting in the ground somewhere. You're lucky Celia took you in. A lot of people wouldn't." The words hung in the air, suspended by their cruelty. Layla's shoulders stiffened where she sat beside Clara on the couch. Mateo leaned into me, small and warm and so damn quiet. I kissed the top of his head and looked over at Celia. Her hands were in her lap, but her fingernails were digging into her palms like she didn't know where else to put her rage. Her eyes shimmered but never broke. That told me everything. She wasn't surprised. She was just finally letting herself believe it. Clara spoke first. "No," she said, almost to herself. "No, I didn't raise a woman who says things like that." She looked pale. Older. Lionel just stared at the screen. I think something in him cracked the moment Nora laughed at a child's pain. The old man had spent most of his life believing in forgiveness as a family virtue. But in that moment, I saw that virtue die in him. "You did," I said gently. "But you also raised Celia. And right now, Celia has to decide what kind of mother she wants to be in this moment." Celia stood slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, like she was waking from a long and complicated sleep. How could she do this to my children? Her voice cracked, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. How could she smile in their faces and call herself their aunt? No one answered because there was nothing left to say. The evidence had said it all. Nora had crossed a line years ago, and we were only just now catching up to the damage. She'd been planting doubt like seeds, watering it with bitterness, waiting for it to take root. But this wasn't her garden anymore. Not 1 inch of it. Clara stood next. "That's enough," she said. "I don't want to see her. I don't want her in this house. And if she ever speaks to my grandchildren again, it'll be through a lawyer." Lionel nodded, his voice rough. "And if she can't learn how to respect the children who saved this family, then she doesn't get to be part of it anymore." The weight of those words settled in the air like a verdict. I think Nora would have screamed if she'd been there. Thrown things. Claimed she was misunderstood. Played the victim like she always did. But she wasn't there. She didn't get to control the narrative this time. This was the part where we reclaimed the story. Layla finally spoke. "Can we take the robot apart?" Her voice was flat. "It's stupid now." I crouched beside her, lowering myself until we were eye level. "No, baby. It's not stupid. You made something smart. Beautiful. What she said doesn't get to take that away from you." She didn't answer. But she didn't cry either. That scared me more. Mateo tugged at my sleeve. "Is she gone forever?" I looked him in the eye. "From our lives?" "Yes." "From the world?" "No. But she doesn't get to hurt you again." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Then he leaned into my chest and stayed there. That night, we didn't eat the rest of the pizza. We didn't clean up the decorations. Clara and Lionel offered to take the kids home with them so Celia and I could talk. But I shook my head. No, they stay with us. That's the point. They belong with us. Clara didn't argue. She just kissed Layla's forehead, hugged Mateo so tightly he squeaked, and whispered, "You are everything." Then she and Lionel left. After we got the kids tucked in, Celia sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, her head in her hands. I joined her and waited. Eventually, she said, "I should have seen it. I should have believed you." "I know," I said quietly. "But you needed to believe she could change. That doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human." "No," she said. "It makes me a coward. You stood between her and our children." I just stood back. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I didn't try to paint over her guilt. She needed to feel it, own it, and then let it go. "You can stand up now," I said. "That's what matters." Over the next week, everything changed. Clara and Lionel started showing up more. They brought books for Layla, puzzles for Mateo, asked real questions, stayed for dinners, helped with homework. Not to make up for Nora, but to rewrite their own pages in the story. They didn't just say sorry. They did sorry. And that made all the difference. Celia called a therapist. Got the kids in for weekly sessions. Started seeing one herself. The first time she came back from an appointment, she hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "I'm not going to stay silent anymore." I believed her. And me? I stopped apologizing. For being adoptive. For being the one who raised my voice. For being the one who saw what everyone else ignored. I stopped shrinking inside this family and started taking up the space I had earned. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was steady. The family rearranged itself. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And in that truth, something new began to grow. Something stronger. The night after the confrontation wasn't loud. There was no thunderous aftermath, no dramatic shouting or slammed doors. It was just quiet. Thick, dragging quiet. The kind that settles in your bones and makes every movement feel heavier than it should. Celia didn't sleep. Neither did I. We lay in bed, backs turned, the space between us wide and humming with everything we didn't yet know how to say. I stared at the ceiling, watching the slow fan blades trace circles over our heads like they were counting the minutes since our world tilted. At around 2 a.m., I got up. I walked down the hallway past the kids' rooms, pausing outside Layla's door. I didn't knock. I just listened. I could hear her shifting under the covers, not asleep, just restless. I kept walking, ended up in the living room, staring at the remnants of the evening we never wanted. A deflated balloon had settled in the corner. Layla's robotic hand sat lifeless on the coffee table. Streamers sagged from where the tape had given out. It looked like a celebration haunted by the truth. I sat on the couch and waited for morning. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was the soft weight of Mateo crawling onto my lap just after sunrise. His hair was messy, cheeks still warm with sleep, but his eyes were clear. "You didn't come say goodnight," he said softly. "I didn't," I said. "I'm sorry." He nodded, like he understood. Kids always do, even when they shouldn't have to. "Is she gone now?" "Aunt Nora." "Yeah," I said, brushing hair back from his forehead. "She's not coming back." He pressed his cheek to my chest and whispered, "Good." That one word told me more than a dozen therapy sessions could have. Layla joined us a few minutes later. She didn't speak, just curled beside me, pulling a corner of the blanket over her lap like it was a shield. I wrapped an arm around her. She leaned into me, and we sat like that for a long time. I told them what I should have said sooner. "You are mine. And nothing, no one, will ever change that." Layla didn't respond, but her hand tightened around my wrist. That was enough. Later that morning, Celia sat the kids down at the kitchen table and told them the truth, not the whole weight of it, but enough. She explained that what Nora said was wrong, that being adopted didn't make them less, that being chosen didn't make them different, that love, real love, wasn't earned by blood, it was shown in actions. "Your dad and I chose you because we wanted you," she said, her voice steady even as her eyes watered. "Every day since then, we've chosen you again. That's what family means. Choosing each other. Over and over." Mateo nodded, reaching for another spoonful of cereal. Layla looked at me first, then at Celia, and said, "Okay." Just that. Not because she was fine, but because she believed us. She wanted to believe us. Over the next few weeks, we tried to find a new rhythm. Clara and Lionel started coming over every Friday after school. No lectures, no pity, just presence. They'd bring library books, coloring kits, boxes of donuts. The kind of present you can't fake. And Celia, she was different too. More quiet at first, but observant. Intentional. She signed the kids up for weekly sessions with a counselor who specialized in trauma and family systems. She even went herself. After her first appointment, she came home and stood in the doorway watching me cook. "I told the therapist everything," she said. "About Nora. About how I didn't stop her. About how I let you carry that alone." I set the spatula down and turned to face her. "That's over now." "I know," she said, "but I'm not done making it right." We didn't need to make promises. We were already doing the work. One night, I walked past Layla's door and noticed it was cracked open. She was on her bed, sketching something in her notebook. I knocked softly. "Hey." She looked up. "Hi. What are you working on?" "A new hand," she said, turning the sketchbook around. "One that catches and holds." I sat beside her. "What's the difference?" She shrugged. "The last one just picked things up. This one holds them so they don't drop when it gets bumped." She paused, tapping her pencil against the page. "It's stronger." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Sounds like a good design." She looked at me then. "Do you think I'm strong?" "Stronger than anyone I know," I said. even when it doesn't feel like it. She nodded. I'm still mad at her. But I don't want to be. You don't have to rush through that feeling. You're allowed to be mad. I know. She went back to sketching. But I think I'd rather build than stay mad. That moment, it felt like turning a page in a book we thought had been ruined. It didn't erase the damage, but it showed us the next chapter was still ours to write. We stopped talking about Nora, not because we were pretending it never happened, but because we were done letting her take up space. Her name stopped echoing through the walls. Her absence became a gift we didn't owe an explanation. We had a new kind of quiet now, not the silence of holding things in, but the peace that comes from letting things out. The slow repair wasn't perfect. There were still questions, still tears, still nights when one of the kids would wake up from a dream that felt too close to real. But we were there. Every time. We were there. And that, more than anything, was what healed us. 3 weeks passed like fog clearing after a storm. Slow, quiet, but unmistakable. The house felt lighter. Not because the shadows were gone completely, but because we'd stopped pretending they weren't there. There was laughter again, even if it was tentative. Mateo danced in the living room when his favorite cartoon came on. Layla sat at the dining table designing her new robotic hand, tongue poking out in concentration, asking Clara for help with the hinge measurements. Celia started humming in the mornings, soft, absent-minded melodies while packing lunches, like something in her had begun to thaw. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. So when Mateo's 9th birthday rolled around, we decided to throw him a party. Not just any party. A community center kind of party. Bounce house. Face paint. Streamers taped to the walls with way too much enthusiasm. Clara brought cupcakes from the bakery on 6th Street, chocolate with electric blue frosting that stained every child's lips and hands. Lionel manned the balloon animal station, a skill he'd picked up in some long-forgotten chapter of his life, now resurrected to the delight of a dozen squealing kids. Celia coordinated games, and I handled music and damage control, which, with 9-year-olds hopped up on sugar, meant a lot of both. Mateo was glowing. He wore a red birthday crown made of felt and glitter glue, and he grinned like nothing bad had ever touched his life. Layla led a group of girls in making slime at one of the side tables. Clara took photos of everything. And for a few hours, it felt like this messy, noisy, joyful chaos was the only thing that had ever existed, until the door opened. I was in the middle of untangling a balloon string from the ceiling fan when I saw her. Nora, dressed like she was attending a Sunday brunch, not a kid's birthday party, cream blouse, soft curls, sunglasses pushed onto her head like a crown. She wore a practiced smile, the kind you see in toothpaste commercials or courtroom apologies. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Celia froze across the room. Layla spotted her next and took a step back so fast she nearly knocked over the slime. Mateo didn't notice. He was too busy trying to catch a piece of confetti midair. I moved quickly. Not frantic. Just steady. I met Nora halfway, before she got too far inside. You weren't invited, I said flatly. I know, she said, with a tight chuckle that wasn't amused. But I thought maybe we could move forward. I brought a gift. She held up a neatly wrapped box, silver paper, and a blue ribbon that probably took her 20 minutes to tie. Tell Mateo happy birthday. She tried to step around me. I didn't move. Behind us, Clara had walked over. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She just placed a hand on Nora's arm and said, "No, you don't get to pretend anymore." Nora looked at her like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Mom, I'm trying. I'm showing up. Clara's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Showing up doesn't mean anything if all you bring is poison dressed as presents. These children deserve peace. This family deserves peace. You're not part of that right now. I'm still your daughter, Nora said, her tone sharper now. And I'm still their grandmother, Clara replied. And I choose them. Lionel walked over then, joining the line between her and the party. You've said enough, Nora. You've done enough. It's time to leave. Her expression shifted, like she was waiting for someone to intervene. Like Shirley, someone, Celia, maybe, or one of the kids, would rush to her side, plead with her to stay, play the role of the forgiving hero in her redemption arc. But no one moved. Layla watched from her table, arms folded across her chest, her expression blank and unflinching. Celia stood by the door, arms tight around her ribs, lips pressed into a firm, straight line. Even Mateo, now aware of the change in atmosphere, wandered over and stood beside me. "Why is she here?" he asked. I crouched down beside him, I still locked on Nora. She's leaving, I said. Nora opened her mouth, then closed it again. She took a long breath, like she might try one last Hail Mary, some teary-eyed apology, some twisted justification. But then she saw something in all our faces. Something final. No one begged her to stay. No one offered grace on her terms. So she turned, quietly, walked out the same way she came in. And that was it. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For a few seconds, everything was still. Then Lionel turned and clapped his hands together. Who wants balloon swords? The kids shouted and ran toward him, the moment erased in the blur of cupcakes and colored rubber. Celia walked to Layla and touched her shoulder. You okay? Layla nodded. She didn't get to ruin it. No, Celia said. She didn't. I looked at Mateo. You good, bud? He thought about it, then said, Can I have 2 cupcakes now? I laughed. You can have 3. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Kids screamed, frosting flew, and at one point, Lionel managed to make a balloon giraffe that looked more like a confused duck, but Mateo loved it. Layla ended up with a slime stain on her shirt, and Celia got frosting on her cheek. And me? I stood by the DJ table, watching the chaos unfold, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not because it was over, but because the worst had come to our door and walked away empty-handed. Because for the first time, we didn't flinch. We didn't fold. We didn't invite the monster back and just to keep the picture pretty. We chose truth. We chose boundaries. We chose each other. And that, more than anything, was worth celebrating. I found the flash drive one quiet Saturday afternoon. The house was still, sun slanting in through the living room windows, casting soft golden strips across the floor. Celia had taken Layla to her robotics workshop. Mateo was upstairs, humming while he built something out of Lego bricks. I had been looking for an old receipt in the junk drawer when my fingers brushed against it, small, metallic, weightless. I stared at it for a long time, not because I forgot what it was, but because I remembered too clearly. It wasn't just a flash drive. It was a vault. Every clip, every whisper, every manipulation Nora had delivered like a poisonous gift. It was all in there. The videos, the audio files, the screenshots of text that had once made my stomach twist, this tiny object held them all. A compressed record of a war we never wanted but had been forced to fight. I stood there with it in my palm, breathing slowly, and felt the weight of something that had outlived its purpose. Beside it, I found the black notebook I'd used to document dates, observations, patterns. I'd kept it tucked away behind old instruction manuals and expired coupons, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wasn't ready to let it go. Not until now. Mateo wandered downstairs with a green dragon taped to his shoulder and asked, What's that, Dad? I looked at the flash drive, and then at him. It's everything that used to hurt us. He tilted his head like he was trying to decide if that made sense. Are we going to throw it away? I smiled. We're going to do something better. That night, after dinner and showers and long hugs that didn't need explanations, I told everyone to meet me in the backyard. It was still warm outside. The grass was dry, the breeze gentle, and the stars just beginning to blink awake in the sky. Celia looked at me curiously but didn't ask questions. Layla brought out a bag of marshmallows. Mateo carried graham crackers like they were treasure. I brought the fire pit back to life, flames crackling steadily, and placed the flash drive and notebook on the metal edge. This, I said, holding up the flash drive, was our defense. Our protection. But we don't need it anymore. Layla stepped forward. Why not? Because we already won, I said. We told the truth. We stood up. We chose each other. There's no more pretending. No more proving. That part of the story's over. She looked at the fire, then at me. So, we're burning it? I nodded. Only if we all agree. Mateo looked at Layla. Can we make s'mores after? That's the rule, I said. If you burn something heavy, you end with something sweet. Layla cracked a smile at that, just a small one, but it was the kind I hadn't seen in weeks. Celia stood beside me. She took the notebook from my hand, opened it briefly, then closed it without reading. Let's do it. I dropped the flash drive into the flames first. It didn't burst. It didn't scream. It just curled into itself, the plastic warping, the metal core glowing briefly before falling silent. Then the notebook. It caught faster, paper always does. Pages curled like old leaves, blackening from the corners inward. I could still picture the words I'd written, dates, quotes, little arrows of disbelief. But they didn't belong to us anymore. Layla stepped close, staring at the flickering embers. "It's weird," she said. "I thought I'd feel scared. But I don't." "That's because you're not scared anymore," I told her. "You're brave." She nodded, then held out a marshmallow on a stick. "Time for sweet things now." So we made s'mores. Mateo tried to fit 3 marshmallows between 2 graham crackers and ended up with sticky hands and a mouthful of sugar. Layla roasted hers slowly, golden brown, like she was sculpting it. Celia toasted one and immediately dropped it when it got too hot, laughing for the first time in a while. I sat back, arm draped around her shoulder, watching the kids bathe in firelight and laughter. The flames snapped and danced, and behind them, I saw a different kind of fire, one that didn't destroy but purified. This wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing, about making room for something better. Nora's words, her damage, her absence, they'd taken up so much space. But not anymore. Tonight, she was reduced to ash and silence. Layla leaned into my side, sticky fingers brushing my arm. "Are we okay now, Dad?" I looked at her, really looked at her. This girl who had once clung to her stuffed bear in the backseat of our car, not speaking for days. This girl who had learned to code before she trusted the word forever. This girl who chose me, even when she didn't know how to say it. "More than okay," I said. "We're unbreakable." She didn't smile big. Just a soft twitch at the corner of her lips, like the fire inside her had found peace. Mateo fell asleep curled up on the blanket with a half-eaten marshmallow in one hand. Celia kissed the top of my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on us." I didn't answer her with words. Just kissed her temple and held her close as the fire dimmed into embers and the stars above blinked a little brighter. We sat there long after the last marshmallow was gone, after the last crackle of the notebook died away, after the silence returned, not the painful kind, not the tense kind, but the quiet of peace earned, of damage healed, of a family whole. And in that warmth, with the past finally behind us, I realized something simple and profound. We were free. It's funny how many people think love is a matter of biology. How often they reduce family to strands of DNA and surname placements, like what makes someone a father is written in blood instead of lived in moments. Maybe it's easier that way, clean, measurable, scientifically bound. But I know better. I've lived better. Being a father isn't about the signature on an adoption decree or the name on a birth certificate. It's in the 3 a.m. fevers, the bad dreams chased away with lullabies, the scraped knees kissed and Band-Aid wrapped. It's in the slow, faithful work of showing up, especially when no one's clapping. Layla and Mateo didn't come from me, but they came to me, and they stayed. That's what matters. That's what makes us family. I remember one morning, a few weeks after we burned the flash drive, when Layla asked me if I remembered the day we met her. I told her of course I did. I told her I remembered the little plastic bead bracelet she wore, the way she gripped Mateo's hand so tightly he almost cried. I remembered how she didn't speak the entire ride home, but looked out the window with eyes full of both wonder and mourning. She nodded and said, "I remember, too. But mostly I remember how safe it felt when you said we didn't have to call you anything we didn't want to. That was the secret, I think. I never asked them to call me Dad. I just lived like I already was. I made breakfast. I knelt for hugs. I sat through cartoons I didn't understand. I let them teach me. I stayed. Until one day, the word Dad came naturally, like a door they opened on their own. There was a time when I used to look for validation. I used to watch Clara's reactions, Lionel's small shifts in tone, Celia's silences around her sister, hoping someone would say it out loud. "You're really their father." I don't need that anymore. Not because it wouldn't be nice to hear, but because I already know. Clara and Lionel do too now. They tell everyone they have 4 grandchildren, 2 biological, 2 chosen, no qualifiers. They come to every school event, every birthday, every project showcase. At Layla's robotics fair, Clara brought a poster with glitter letters that read, "Layla's Logic League," and Lionel nearly cried watching the robotic hand pick up a pencil. Not because of what it could do, but because of who built it, and who stood beside her beaming with pride. Celia stopped making excuses for Nora. She hasn't spoken to her sister since the day of the party. And I've seen the weight that decision carries. Forgiveness is hard, but sometimes it's not a door you close softly. Sometimes it's a bridge you burn because you finally realize the other side was always sinking. Still, there are days I wonder if I would have done anything differently. If I'd spoken up sooner. If I'd forced the truth into the open instead of letting it fester. But then I look at my kids and see how they carry themselves now, heads higher, voices steadier, and I know that healing came exactly when it needed to. Not rushed, not delayed. Right on time. One evening, a month or so after Nora's exit faded into memory, Mateo handed me a drawing. It was a stick figure family, classic stuff. Celia with long hair, Layla holding a wrench for some reason, Mateo with a dragon tail, and me. But what struck me was the label he'd scribbled above us. Not mom and dad. Not family. Just one word, ours. I asked him about it. Why ours? Because that's what we are, he said, as if it were obvious. Ours. You're ours. We're yours. That's the whole point. It really was. I've stopped wondering what people think when they hear we adopted. I've stopped bracing myself for the tilted heads and the well-meaning but invasive questions like, do they ever ask about their real parents? Or do you ever wish you'd had kids of your own? Because the answer is always the same. I do have kids of my own. They just didn't come from me. They came to me. And they stayed. Last week, Celia and I took the kids to the lake. It wasn't fancy, just a day of sandwiches, skipping rocks, and soft sunburns. Mateo kept trying to catch frogs with a net too small for the task. Layla brought a book and a notebook and switched between the two like a scientist in training. Celia laid her head in my lap and closed her eyes as the wind tousled her hair. Do you still think about that night? She asked softly, not even opening her eyes. Sometimes, I said, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It does for me, she admitted. It will for a while. But it doesn't define us. She opened her eyes then, looked up at me. You saved us. I shook my head. We saved each other. That night, I tucked Mateo into bed and he whispered, I hope I grow up like you. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat on the edge of his bed and ran my hand over his blanket, willing myself not to cry. You will, I said eventually. Because you already know how to love people right. And Layla hugged me tighter than usual before bed, her arms around my waist, face pressed into my side. Don't ever leave, okay? She said. Never, I told her. Because how could I? They were the life I'd chosen. The life that had chosen me back. So no, I don't need bloodlines or matching last names to validate who I am. I don't need a holiday card with coordinated sweaters to prove I belong. I just need the weight of Mateo's head on my chest when he's tired. The way Layla looks at me when she nails a presentation. The way Celia says, our kids now without hesitation. Because being a real father isn't about how you start. It's about how you stay. And I'm not going anywhere.